Sir, as we have a quorum, I suggest we now commence our meeting in public session. Haven't received any apologies, so I take it that we have a full complement of members for today's meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defence. Read the appointment of special envoys and an update on the current situation in Afghanistan. Very pleased that we're meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Simon Coveney, in respect of the appointment of special envoys.
Charlie, we can't hear you.
Can't hear the Chair.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, Chair, you've been muted somehow. You need to unmute, I think. Apologies.
Can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Yep.
Yep. Apologies. I'm pleased that this evening we're meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Defence, Deputy Simon Coveney, in respect of the appointment of special envoys and to receive an update and discuss the current situation in Afghanistan. We're now meeting in public session. You're very welcome here this afternoon, Minister. I want also to welcome Mr. Niall Burgess, Secretary-General of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Sonia Hyland, Political Director of the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I wish to thank them for the briefing material that we received during the course of the last few weeks. The format of the meeting is that we'll firstly deal with the appointment of special envoys, and when finished with that matter, we'll move on to questions and discussion in respect of Afghanistan. Details of the recent envoy situation caused some concern over the course of our vacation, and I'm pleased that we have the opportunity of dealing with certain issues that were the subject and generation of public controversy. As time is limited, the Minister's opening statement will be brief. Before going into a question and answer session with members of the committee, I will ask you, Minister, to make some brief opening remarks on both our subjects. I ask members to indicate by means of the hand raise function if they wish to be called, and I will take members in order by party and group. I'll take a number of members' questions together before returning to the Minister to respond. But again, to point out that as time is limited for the session, I'm asking members to be concise in their questions, and I'm asking the Minister to be concise in his response. I propose to set a limit of 3 minutes in the initial round for each member, and time permitting, we can come back with supplementary questions of 1 minute each. And I also propose to allow 5 minutes for the Minister's response to each group of questions and 1 minute in the supplementary round. I ask for agreement on that. Agreed? Thank you. And just in respect of housekeeping, a note on privilege. Minister and members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they shouldn't comment on or criticise or make charges against any person outside the Houses or unofficially either by name or in such ways to make them identifiable. I would like to remind members that they're only allowed to participate in this meeting if they're physically located on the Leinster House complex. And for anybody watching this meeting online, some Oireachtas members and witnesses are accessing the meeting in remote format. Indeed, due to these unprecedented circumstances, and I think that this will be the last of our meetings in such circumstances, the fact that people are attending remotely, I ask that everybody bear with us should any issues of a technical nature arise. So with that, and having regard to the fact that we are limited, I'm asking you, Minister, to make your opening comments, and I thank you for making time available to be with us this evening. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I've been asked to give opening comments on both issues, and then obviously to take questions, I think, in two different segments. First of all, in relation to the Special Envoy, process and then in relation to Afghanistan. So if you can bear with me, I'll make an opening statement on both, and then I won't make any more formal statements and focus on answering your questions as best I can.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. Developments in Afghanistan in recent weeks have shocked the world, and with good reason. I welcome the opportunity to update the committee today, including on the recent mission of our diplomatic and military team there, as well as an active discussion at international level on the crisis in the context of Ireland's forthcoming presidency of the UN Security Council, which begins on Wednesday. I'm also pleased to have an opportunity to address this committee on the issue of special envoys and to clarify any questions that may arise. Special envoys have been deployed by my department and by the government over many years to advance specific government priorities. The duration, tasking and support provided has varied in accordance with the nature of the role. Ireland is not an outlier in this regard. EU partners and like-minded states such as the US and Canada also deploy special envoys to highlight and build networks of influence on thematic priorities or to deepen engagement in particular geographic regions. The committee will be aware, for example, that US special envoys to Northern Ireland have played a particularly important role in contributing to the peace process on this island. Ireland currently has 2 special envoys. Mr. Tom Arnold is serving as Government Special Envoy on Food Systems, a role that was jointly proposed by my Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, linked to preparations for the UN Food Systems Summit next month in September, on September the 23rd, and the Nutrition for Growth Summit in December 2021. Mr. Keith Thompson is serving as Special Envoy for Francophone Africa and the Sahel, a role linked to Ireland's term on the Security Council. It's of great value and importance in a region that features prominently on the Council agenda and where Ireland does not yet have an embassy network. I also recall the contribution made by a number of time-limited special envoys deployed by the government in the course of Ireland's campaign for membership of the Security Council. These envoys, who were mainly serving or recently retired Irish diplomats, engaged with and travelled to a wide range of countries and regions to promote Ireland's candidacy, particularly to countries where Ireland does not have an embassy or established diplomatic relations. They also undertook meetings at the UN, the African Union and other international and regional organisations. I've no doubt that the sustained engagement by these envoys was critical to a successful outcome for Ireland in what was a very competitive election campaign. I'd like to acknowledge also the work of former Minister Zappone as a special envoy for the Security Council campaign while a serving minister. The decision to appoint her in September 2019 was taken in order to bolster Ireland's profile in the final months of that campaign. During her 9 months in this role, Ms. Zappone led 25 bilateral meetings in which our candidature was raised, mainly with countries where we do not have embassies on the ground. These meetings took place in the margins of the UN General Assembly in September 2019, at the International Conference on Population and Development in Nairobi in November 2019, and in parallel with official engagements in New York in March 2020. Katherine Zappone stepped down and left politics last summer. She moved to live full-time in New York. She reached out to me last summer and in a brief conversation mentioned that she would be available to help in any way she could in our work at the UN. Katherine Zappone and I spoke now and again, as former colleagues do. I remember, for example, speaking to her the morning of the US presidential election result. She'd been involved, I think, in the Biden campaign. In February of this year, we spoke and Katherine Zappone told me of work she was doing in the UN system. At no point in that conversation did I consider that she was lobbying me for a specific job. Following on from that conversation, however, I reflected on the fact that Katherine Zappone was a former Irish minister, had been heavily involved in our Security Council campaign, had campaigned all her life on issues of equality and was now living in New York. Late in February, on the 24th of February, I met with my Secretary General to review our first months on the Security Council. We were also meeting to consider a range of new ambassadorial appointments. At the end of that meeting, I asked him for his view on whether Katherine Zappone could be of any use to our team in New York, given the nature of the work that we were involved in. He told me that he would reflect on that. As members of the committee will be aware, we're currently seeing an increasingly polarised debate on human rights internationally, and even within the EU. There is significant pushback against the very definition of human rights in certain states. As a result, many states that would share Ireland's approach to human rights have appointed special envoys with mandates in this area. In light of this, officials in my department recommended a role with a broad mandate focusing on freedom of expression. The department believed this would provide enhanced capacity for high-level engagement on established Irish human rights priorities, including the human rights of LGBTI plus persons, civil society space, freedom of the media, and freedom of association. I approached Katherine Zappone and asked if she'd be interested in taking this role in principle. She said she would, and I handed the process back to the Secretary-General. I was not involved at any point in discussions around terms and conditions, which isn't unusual. So, Chair, as Minister for Foreign Affairs, I made the decision to ask Katherine Zappone if she would consider the role of Special Envoy. That was on the basis of my department's view that there was a substantive body of work to do to advance Ireland's priorities in the areas of freedom of opinion and expression. And I look forward to taking your questions on that. Turning now to the situation in Afghanistan. Since capturing Kabul on the 15th of August, the Taliban has sought to communicate an image of moderation, promising amnesty for former rivals, peace and rights of women within the limits of Islam, which they have not defined, and called for recognition from the international community. However, the scenes of panic at Kabul airport demonstrate the scepticism of most Afghans, especially urban women, and those raised since the previous Taliban administration was forced out of office in 2001. This also reflects the violence perpetrated by the Taliban in recent months as they retook territory outside the capital. Ireland's approach to Afghanistan has been consistently clear. We've called for an end to the violence and for negotiations between all parties to reach a negotiated political settlement. We've called for the Taliban to work with others to build a peaceful and inclusive transition government that serves all Afghans. Any future Afghan administration must protect civilians and fulfill Afghanistan's obligations under international law. Human rights, especially for Afghan women and girls and minorities, must be respected, protected and upheld. Afghanistan must never again become a haven for international terrorism. All foreign nationals and those Afghans who wish to leave Afghanistan, including those to whom Ireland has offered resettlement, should not be hindered in doing so. The Taliban must guarantee safe access for humanitarian aid and those providing vital and life-saving assistance to the Afghan people. These are the principles that are guiding Ireland during our presidency of the Security Council on Afghanistan. The Security Council discussed the situation in Afghanistan in emergency session on the 16th of August. Ireland also joined with 96 other states in a statement on the 29th of August, reminding the Taliban of their assurances to provide safe passage to those who wish to leave Afghanistan. Last night, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2593, which affirms the importance of human rights, humanitarian assistance, and the need to allow safe passage. Ireland was very involved in the drafting of that. The Security Council is also scheduled to discuss the situation in Afghanistan and the UN assistance mission in the country on the 9th of September. Afghanistan will also be a key focus of an informal meeting of the EU foreign ministers, the so-called Gymnich meeting later this week in Slovenia, and I'll be there. Chair, the rapid takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban led to the rapid evacuation efforts at Hamid Karzai International Airport, which became one of the most complex operations of its kind ever managed by the international community. My department in the Embassy of Ireland in Abu Dhabi has been providing consular assistance and advice to Irish citizens wishing to leave Afghanistan since mid-August. Close cooperation and coordination on the evacuation process through Hamid Karzai International Airport was also ongoing with EU member states, the UK, the US, and indeed other partners. 10 Irish citizens were successfully evacuated between the 17th. It became clear, however, that it was increasingly complex for family groups to gain access to the airport. On the recommendation of the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Defence, and taking into consideration the security advice and threat assessment from the Defence Forces, I approved the deployment of an emergency civil assistance team, or ECAT as it's called, on the evening of Monday, the 23rd of August. The ECAT team comprised 2 officials from my department and 9 members of the Defence Forces, or the Army Ranger Wing as they're known. The ECAT deployed in the early hours of Tuesday, the 24th of August, with the support of the French Armed Forces. This was a short-term support to the consular response on the situation in Afghanistan. The goal of the ECAD mission was to provide consular advice and assistance, including by assisting in the safe evacuation of the Irish citizens and dependents that had been identified. The ECAD mission remained in the environs of the airport at all stages of the mission. With the support of ECAD, 26 Irish citizens, family members and residents were successfully supported to evacuate Afghanistan. I wish at this point to sincerely thank the ECAD team for their efforts in such a challenging and complex environment, and all those who have supported the overall consular response. I'd also like to thank sincerely our international partners for their assistance. Without that assistance, we simply couldn't have done what we did. I know there are many in Ireland today who are deeply concerned for family members, friends and colleagues who remain in Afghanistan. I can give full assurance that the overall consular effort is continuing, and we remain strongly committed to assisting those requiring ongoing consular support in Afghanistan. We are liaising with partners, including those who have a presence on the ground, to advise on safe options for remaining Irish citizens and dependents who wish to do so, to leave the country in the period ahead. We'll also continue to provide guidance to people who have a right to Irish residency who are in Afghanistan. In fact, I've asked my team to treat both with an equal priority. Ireland has also offered resettlement to approximately 280 vulnerable Afghans, including human rights defenders, those working to protect the rights of women and girls, and those working with NGOs and international organisations. The Department of Justice is also working to facilitate family reunification visas. We support a recent call on the international community by the President of the European Commission to support the many Afghans displaced in recent months in neighbouring countries. Finally, in the same spirit, Ireland signed up to a joint statement with a number of countries on Sunday with regard to travel assurances from the Taliban on evacuation. It is our sincere hope that all foreign nationals and all Afghan citizens with travel authorisation from another country, including Ireland, will be allowed to proceed in a safe and orderly manner to points of departure and travel outside the country. We will carefully monitor the situation on the ground in the coming days and weeks and work with other government departments, in particular the Department of Children, Equality, Disability Integration and Youth, and the Department of Justice. I would like to put on the record my appreciation for the excellent cooperation and flexibility we've witnessed in the recent weeks from those departments. I hope in doing so we've saved some lives. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. On the matter of questions, we're now dealing with the special envoy issue. I'm calling on Deputy Barry Cowan, followed by Deputy Brady and Senator Joe O'Reilly. Deputy Cowan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your presentation and for your clarifications that you've sought to provide us today. I personally, I've said before, I found the appointment bizarre, notwithstanding, as you've mentioned, other unsuccessful envoy appointments that have been made previously. I found the Cabinet approval of the appointment bizarre too, but I'm glad Katherine Zappone recognised that there wasn't sufficient and widespread support for her appointment and subsequently declined the role. So just some questions arising out of what you've said, and I might give them to you all of them for you to answer rather than taking up time answering them and not answering others. So in February of this year, you spoke with Katherine Zappone. You said she told you of the work she was doing in the UN system. First of all, what date in February was that, and what work in the UN was she doing? Was it full-time or part-time in the system? You said you didn't consider that she was lobbying, but it did put a seed in your head that you took up later in February with the Secretary-General when you asked for him to consider or give his opinion as to whether he thought such a role, that you could play a role with your workings in the UN. What date was that? Did you discuss it again with the Secretary-General, or was it only mentioned again to him when you had asked that he agree terms and conditions of the appointment which you had offered Katherine Zappone at that stage in principle? And what date specifically did you offer that role in principle? Then can you inform us, please, when did the Taoiseach become aware that such a role of such an envoy was under consideration in the first instance, And notwithstanding that, if he wasn't aware of that aspect of the work that was going on within the department, when did he become aware or informed that the offer had been made in principle to Katherine Zappone? That the offer had been made in principle or subject to cabinet approval? And finally, when offered the role, you did outline that it was subject to cabinet approval, or is that normally the case in previous instances, or was specifically the case in this one? In relation to the members of the cabinet not being informed, look, I can accept your bona fides in that regard. It's unfortunate, but I know a mistake may have been made. But you would have prepared, or somebody would have prepared, a memo for cabinet that did include, I understand, appointments to various ambassador roles. And why didn't it include this appointment also? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Count. Deputy John Brady.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for attending the meeting this evening, Minister. And it's unfortunately we couldn't hold this meeting earlier than now, because it has been an issue of serious concern over the summer months, and certainly there's a lot of outstanding questions that need answered around the creation of a well-paid position for a friend, a former cabinet colleague of yourself, Minister, not openly advertised or subject to competition, and certainly no transparency around the whole process. And even to this date, there's still an attempt to deny any notion of any transparency. So I have a number of questions, Minister, and I hope you will answer them fully. So last summer, you had a brief conversation with Katherine Zappone. Can I ask, when did that conversation take place? Was it before or after we'd secured our seat on the UN Security Council in June? In February, you said you spoke to Katherine Zappone again. Can I ask what specific date in February that was, and who initiated that conversation? Was it yourself, or did Katherine Zappone reach out to you? And you say in relation to that conversation that you didn't feel that she was lobbying for the position, and you made reference to that specific conversation, but you didn't make reference to the conversation you had last summer. Did you feel that she was lobbying? And lobbying is clearly defined in the Lobbying Act. So can I ask, did she specifically ask for a position within the UN, or for a position to be made up? And just again, when did you offer the position in principle? An exact date, when did you offer that position to Katherine Zappone? And again, the issue of the Taoiseach. When did you notify the Taoiseach that you had been in conversation with Katherine Zappone? When was the Taoiseach informed that she had agreed to take the position in principle? So if we can have exact dates for that. And just in relation to Katherine Zappone's event in the Marriott Hotel, Minister, were you invited along to that gig in the hotel? And obviously at one point, Katherine Zappone came back to Ireland from New York. And at any point prior to cabinet approval, between February and July, did you have any other further communication by email, phone call, or meeting in person with Katherine Zappone at any stage? And there's been a lot of demands that the full attendance of the event in the Marriott Hotel would be made public, Minister. And I'd ask you now, do you support that call? Do you think there should be full transparency around the attendance list? And I find it bizarre that, and hopefully you might clarify, that you, a personal friend, someone who is in regular contact with Katherine Zappone, may not have been invited, and yet we see some of the other people that have came out and stated they have been in either invited or in attendance. Minister, I want to ask in relation to FOI requests that have been made to the department by a number of journalists, and it appears that the department are shutting down FOI requests relating to the appointment by publishing redacted records and thus closing off the right of a requester of appeal. And certainly it appears they're on fairly spurious grounds. Can I ask, why is that? Why are FOI requests being redacted? And do you support and will you make all documentation available for public scrutiny around the entire process as well, Minister? And Minister, I find it bizarre that a position like this would be created for a former cabinet colleague, a position that no one within the department had thought of being necessary up until that point. And I'm sure your department and you personally have been contacted by many members of the public and many with serious expertise in many different fields offering their services. And I find it bizarre that I suppose all of those requests had never been considered for any special envoy position. And yet a former colleague, someone who you were in regular contact with, made an offer of our services, and this position was created for. So can I ask, how often would you be contacted by people offering their services, their expertise, their knowledge and their skills, and what process is taken to analyse any of those proposals? And maybe you might finally, Chair, Minister, you might outline the process for the appointment of, there's 2 other UN envoys currently in place, and you might expand as to how those appointments were made as well.
Thank you, Deputy Brady. I'm very conscious of time, and I am anxious that we have some time, perhaps for a second round. Can I just say we don't have any jurisdiction or role in the matter of private parties in Dublin hotels. However, I think the Minister can answer for himself. And also in respect of FOI requests, there is an accepted practice and procedure that I'm sure hasn't been departed from, but the Minister might assist in that regard. I'm moving to Senator Joe O'Reilly, followed by Deputy Gary Gannon and Senator Crockwell. Senator O'Reilly, please.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair. Welcome, Minister, and thank you for your presentation. And at the outset, just to say, can you hear me? Okay, yeah. At the outset, just to say quickly and briefly, Chair, I had the privilege of leading the Irish delegation to the Council of Europe for some years, and for a part of that time, Katherine Zappone was part of that delegation, and I must say, an exemplary member and an exemplary networker, but that's just to put that on the record. But I know that's not the kernel of the discussion. Now, having said that, first question, does the Minister believe with hindsight or on reflection that a process offering opportunities to multiple applicants, say for shortlisting to go to the Minister and Cabinet from, say, this committee would be helpful in future in a position like this as we go on appointing envoys as they're required in the future? That's question 1. 2, as an A and B, how specifically and in practical terms did the Minister see a special envoy advancing LGBTQI rights? What additionality does the Minister believe former Minister Zappone would offer there? And B of that, is the Minister clear that the need preceded the appointment rather than that the appointment was to adjust to the set of qualifications she had? So does the Minister want to comment on that? Number 4, does the Minister believe former Minister Zappone can or should be involved in future appointments or go through a process where she could be considered for future appointments? 5, could the Minister remind the committee of specific achievements by former envoys for Ireland, if some of those could be drawn to the attention, and particularly for people listening in? And number 6, do we run the risk of overlap complexity, overlap, a duplication of roles if we appoint envoys on top of ambassadors and on top of yourself, Minister, and your officials? It's a question that would reasonably occur to listeners or to people observing the meeting. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
At this point, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Riley. I'm going to revert to the Minister now, having received questions from Deputy Cowan, from Deputy Brady, from Senator Joe O'Reilly. I'm going to give the Minister a couple of minutes to respond, and then I'm coming back. I have 9 members offering. I'm going to resume with members, namely Deputy Gannon, Senator Crockwell, Senator Arda and Deputy Clark, in that order. Minister, to respond to the 3 sets of questions as already tendered.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I might bring my SecGen in as well, just on the process that took place, just so people fully understand that, because I know that members don't have the right to ask questions to an official. But if it's helpful to broaden the explanation, I can certainly ask Niall Burgess to do that. So just to Deputy Cowan's questions first. When I say in my statement that Katherine Zappone spoke to me in February to update me on work that she was doing in the UN system, from recollection, because I don't have a written documentation of that call, but that would have been in the second half of February, from what I can remember, and she updated me that she was doing some work with UNFPA. And that she was hoping to work with them until the end of June or so, and she was updating me on that. I also spoke to her after the presidential election. She was hugely involved in following that election, and as many of us were, and she texted me around that time, and I spoke to her. But when Deputy Brady said that I was clearly a close friend and had regular contact with Katherine Zappone, I don't think that would be an accurate assessment. I mean, I had a good professional relationship with Katherine Zappone, but I wouldn't regard us as close friends per se. But I have worked with her on many projects when we were in government, and she was very involved in the last 9 months of our Security Council campaign, and she was on the road travelling, lobbying and campaigning as I was, trying to get support for our campaign, and that's really when I suppose I got to know Katherine. In terms of the meeting with the Secretary General was on February the 24th. We did have a record of that in my diary and in the SecGen's diary. We checked that. That was a meeting actually to discuss a number of things. First of all, our first couple of months in the Security Council, and secondly, to look at a list of ambassadorial appointments that we had to make, I think, the following month. And so it would be perfectly normal that the Minister and the SecGen would talk to each other about trying to match up the right people with the right appointments in different parts of the world. It was at the end of that meeting when I said to my SecGen, and it was it wasn't something that was on the agenda or anything. It was an informal raising at the end. I said, because I had spoken to Katherine Zappone a few days earlier, I said, do you think Katherine Zappone could add value to our team in New York? I mean, and it was as simple as that. And the SecGen said, look, let me think about that, and I'll come back to you. And that triggered a process that I maybe asked Niall to brief you on, because I think it's important that people understand what happened here, because there's been a lot said in recent weeks, and this is a good opportunity, I hope, to try to put the record straight. In terms of a number of questions that I've got around when did the Taoiseach know, to be perfectly honest with you, the Taoiseach was just not involved in these discussions. I didn't involve him in the discussions. Really, the only time I briefed the Taoiseach in any detail was in advance of bringing this to Cabinet. So, and we didn't have an actual proposal until, as in a detailed proposal, until midsummer anyway. And I can go through that timeline if it's helpful for people. Just in relation to, I mean, there were genuine mistakes made in the build-up to the Cabinet meeting itself, and I regret that. We should never have a situation in a government meeting where the Taoiseach learn something for the first time. And that is what happened on the 27th of July. And I'm sorry about that, and I apologise to the Taoiseach for it. I was bringing quite a lot of memos that day. We had a memo on new ambassadorial appointments. We had a memo on new embassies opening up. We had a memo on Expo. We had a memo on a proposal around Ireland competing for the America's Cup. And we had a proposal on, we had an update memo on Brexit. And we had an update memo in relation to Ireland's first 6 months on the Security Council. So for those of you who've been involved in cabinet meetings, what generally happens is before the cabinet meeting, in the days in the build-up to it, advisors talk to each other, they prepare for the meeting, they try to find if anything controversial is coming up and try to find solutions to that and so on. And for whatever reason, this is my fault, the appointment of Katherine Zappone, I didn't see it as a particularly big deal, I have to say. Clearly many others do see it as a very big deal. It did come up in the briefings between the party leaders and their teams, and it should have, and it didn't. And that's, so as I say, you know, the Taoiseach raised that in Cabinet that day. There wasn't a big deal made about it, I had to say. We moved on, the appointment was approved. But I did ring him after that to say, look, that shouldn't have happened, and it won't happen again. Just trying to see if there's any other. Yeah, sorry. This was, by the way, in the cabinet memo, but it just wasn't spotted by some people. And you know, I have the page from the cabinet memo in front of me here, which did talk about a special envoy for freedom of opinion and expression in terms of an appointment. It outlined in brief terms what that was about, and that the Minister of Foreign Affairs requests the approval of government for the appointment of Katherine Zappone as that special envoy. So it was actually in the memo. It was, and can I just say for the record as well, I mean, and I hope you'll take this at face value, I didn't even have to bring this to government if I didn't want to. So, you know, if you look at the Kenneth Thompson appointment, he's a special envoy for the Department of Foreign Affairs to the Sahel and Francophone Africa. That appointment never went to government. He was a civil servant. We needed somebody in that part of Africa in the context of the work we were doing in the Security Council, and he was a special envoy for the department as opposed to the government. So if I was trying to hide something here, you know, I could have just looked to try to make Katherine Zappone a special envoy for the Department of Foreign Affairs. We didn't do that. And I was anxious to bring it to government as part of a whole series of other appointments that we were making in terms of ambassadors at the time, because I thought it was a good news story. You know, I thought Katherine Zappone, in terms of her own record and her own credibility in this space, was a very positive story. And I brought it to government. But we didn't lay the groundwork properly, and that was a mistake that shouldn't have happened. You know, in relation to Deputy Brady's question, you know, you frame this in the context of a well-paid position for a friend. And look, you know, all I can say is that Katherine Zappone, even when I mentioned to her whether she would consider taking up the role of a special envoy in this space, we never spoke about money. And I asked the SecGen to talk to her directly about that, to work out terms and conditions. And what he did was he used precedent in the context of the Ken Thompson appointment in terms of how Katherine would be supported financially through that. So, you know, I think it's important to be accurate here. In the context of, was Katherine Zappone lobbying under the lobbying? I mean, I can honestly say she wasn't. You know, she spoke to me in late summer. I can't remember whether it was before she left for New York or after she got there. But she'd been involved with my department for quite a number of months. In fact, for about 18 months in advance of her leaving politics, linked to the Security Council work that we were doing. She said she was moving to New York, and she simply said, look, if there's anything I can do to help your team in New York, I'd be really interested in doing that, either in a private capacity or a professional capacity. And that was it. And it was a conversation effectively wishing her well for the future, no more or less than that. And it was many months later that I that I spoke to her in the context of the presidential election, and then spoke to her briefly again in February. So that's what happened, and we just ask people to take that at face value. In terms of the Marion Hotel, look, I did get a text telling me that it was on, but I didn't have a formal invitation or anything. I had no interest in going, and I didn't respond to it, and I wasn't in the country. So, like, I had no connection or knowledge or interest, to be honest with you, in that event, and didn't even know it was taking place. Afterwards, obviously, it became a big issue, and I think a lot of people regret that. I mean, it's up to people themselves who were there if they want to make that known or not. My job isn't to chase people on that, but I really had no involvement or knowledge around that event whatsoever. In terms of sorry, now I'm just trying to make sure that I answer the questions.
FOI?
FOI,
yeah.
Charlie, sorry.
FOI request
Chair,
to the department?
That really is a legal matter for the department. I mean, I think it might be helpful if I asked the SecGen just to maybe talk you through what happened after I had a conversation with him and mentioned the issue of whether Katherine Zappone could add to our team in New York, because I think it is important that and the public know that there was quite a process in the department, much of which I didn't even know about, actually assessing whether or not there was a useful role here that would add value, so that the SecGen could come back to me on the issue, having looked at it. And so, Chair, would it be helpful if I asked Niall Burgess to give a very brief outline of that process?
I'm conscious of the fact that I have 9 members on my list for questions, so I will, through you, I'll ask the Secretary-General to be brief and concise, and perhaps he might like to deal with the issue of the FOI request as raised by Deputy Brady. Secretary-General, thank you.
Thank you. On the process, I should add we had one brief conversation after the 24th of February, because a colleague told me that the Biden administration was going to appoint a special envoy for LGBTI plus rights. And I remember mentioning that to the minister in an informal conversation shortly afterwards. And I told him that we would look particularly at that area of the department's work, because it is an area where the department is very active in promoting LGBTI plus rights internationally. In fact, I think we took about 2 months to look at this through a number of different perspectives before we had any further conversation. Initially, I asked a colleague to take a look at our own responsibilities under the National LGBTI plus Inclusion Strategy. Under that strategy, the department has a responsibility for integrating promotion of LGBTI plus rights across our foreign policy, for promoting that work at the UN and in regional organisations, for working with other countries and civil society organisations globally, and for improving outreach and support to our own diaspora, to LGBTI plus communities in our own diaspora. And the department that month was briefing, in fact, the interdepartmental committee on this regard. So we got some input, which basically told us that there would be value in trying to put more resources behind this work. At the same time, we undertook a review of practice on the part of EU partners and other countries that we work particularly closely with in the human rights field. EU partners, the UK and the US, and all of them use dedicated envoys to support their human rights promotion. And not just their human rights promotion, I should say. The mechanism is increasingly deployed by other partner foreign ministries. And that showed that the practice is well regarded by most partners. Eamon Gilmore serves as EU Special Envoy for Human Rights, and partners that we work very closely with, like Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Lithuania, quite a number, are using the mechanism. And then finally, we took a broad look, not just at LGBTI plus rights, but at the work we're doing across the spectrum in human rights. And having reflected on that, we felt that if we were appointing a human rights envoy, we were better to do it at a higher level and to look at some of the rights that are actually enshrined in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And that led us to look at the idea of a mandate for the promotion of freedom of opinion and expression. And the idea behind that is that these are enabling rights. They're enshrined in the Universal Declaration. They're fundamental to the good functioning of democracy and under growing threat in many parts of the world. So that was the deliberative process, I suppose, that took place over a period of 2 months, and we had no further discussion on the work during that period.
Thank you. And just very briefly, Secretary General, on the matter of the charge that in this case the Department has departed from the accepted practice and procedure on the matter of freedom of information requests.
Well, I'm not directly involved in the deliberation on individual requests, but I do know that we have somewhere between 20 and 30 requests under the freedom of information provisions. And the intention here is to release all of the information in one go. In other words, to answer the questions and to make the information freely available. And we're using publication as a route to do that. The intention is to use this as a way of making the information available, not withholding it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm reverting back now to members of the committee, commencing with Deputy Gannon.
Chair, sorry, I didn't get a chance just to answer Senator O'Reilly's question just very briefly.
I'll have to ask you, Minister, maybe to send a note over to the committee. We can have a look at that because I'm very keen to let Deputy Gannon in and others who have been waiting. So perhaps we can have a note in response to Senator O'Reilly's questions. And Deputy Gannon, please, followed by Senator Crockwell, Senator Arda and Deputy Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I just wanted to ask questions that pertain to some of the responses you've just given. My first two questions will relate to those. You mentioned that in the conversation you had with Ms. Zappone back in the summer, she mentioned that she would be open to doing some work for the department at UN level, either in a personal or in a professional capacity. At that time, did you consider that to be lobbying for a job? And if not, what did you think she was actually doing? You mentioned that the Taoiseach knew in advance of the Cabinet meeting. How long in advance of the Cabinet meeting did the Taoiseach know that Mr. Zappone would be appointed, especially UN envoy? I want to talk about the role itself. You've said that we have a substantive body of work to do to advance Ireland's priorities in the areas of freedom of expression and opinion. Given this substantive body of work that does exist, can you confirm a new special envoy will be appointed? When will this take place? And is there a template of a job description that had previously been given to Katherine Zappone for the role? Can I ask if you told any member of your government or any member of Fine Gael previously that Katherine Zappone would be appointed to this role as a special envoy? And that's my questions for the minute, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deputy Gannon. Senator Crockwell, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Minister, thank you for being here this afternoon. Minister, there were 13 envoys used in securing the seat at the United Nations Security Council. Were any of the other 12 approached with a view to filling this role? Can I also ask you, Minister, what duties or role this special envoy for freedom of expression was going to undertake, which was not already covered by the permanent mission of Ireland to the United Nations and Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Neeson and her team, both in New York and at the Department of Foreign Affairs? Additionally, if staff were needed to enhance and strengthen the right of freedom of expression, should these staff not have come from the ranks of the existing career diplomatic corps and the career civil servants who have decades of unwavering loyalty and commitment to this country? As you're aware, Minister, the issue impacting the residents of issues impacting residents you provide Katherine Zappone with a diplomatic passport, or would you have been provided her with a diplomatic passport had she continued in the role? Now, with respect to the Marion Hotel, I take the point that the chairman has made, but I do believe that it's important for clarity to point out, or for you to advise us whether a member of your staff attended that on your behalf. Did the Department of Foreign Affairs pay for the flights for Ms. Zappone to return to Ireland? And was this event an official event under her appointed role as the Special Envoy? Finally, it's probably too late to do anything about it now, but at that final cabinet meeting, several announcements were made of appointments by your department to foreign offices around the world, some of them with months to go. I find that really disturbing that we hear these appointments being brought to cabinet months before they're due to be filled. I leave it at that. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Senator Crockwell. Senator Katherine Arja, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for attending today. I'm very interested to read in the statements you provide to the committee and listening into your oral testimony in relation to the huge role that former Minister Zappone had in securing the seat at the UN Security Council. Was it the case, Minister, that you felt compelled to give her a job, to thank her for this role? Did you feel like you owed her for all her hard work? Because from the notes, I'm unclear whether her appointment is based on the role you say she played in securing the seat on the Security Council, or her well-known rights record on LGP rights in this jurisdiction. So I'd be interested to hear your comments on that. Also, you mentioned that you didn't know about the event in the Marion, but you got a text. Can you tell the committee when you got the text and whom you got the text from? Because I think you were unclear on that. Also, did any members of your staff attend the Marion in your absence? If you could confirm that for us also. And just a final question for both you and for your Secretary General in relation to the sharing of documentation. I note that you have, the Secretary General has commented that he has under 30 FOIs under review. I would say that's very few for a department of your size, and it is quite shocking that you are unable to get through that amount of FOI requests. But will you be in a position, Minister, or will your department be in a position to share
FOIs,
documentation
on this issue
with this committee from this post to the date that decided not to take it up? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katherine. And before reverting to the Minister, questions from Deputy Circuit Clerk.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming into the committee this evening. Can I start with the day that you brought this memo to the Cabinet? You mentioned a considerable amount of memos that were brought that day. Was that date pushed forward for any reason? Why was it that day that this was brought forward? Why wait until the last days of the Dáil to bring this in if conversations had been going on since last summer about this? What was the urgency of that day? It could have waited until September, surely. It could have been brought forward a couple of months beforehand if there was also conversations happening in early 2021. And just on that timeline, Minister, I don't think it's appropriate for this committee to move on from this issue until there has been a full and detailed timeline provided of all communications to do with this appointment, whether it's through freedom of information or not. But we as a committee have a job of work to do. And for us to do that properly and for us to do that effectively, we should have been provided with a complete timeline of communications on this. You are correct when you said, Minister, a lot has been said on this issue, and there's been a lot of varying contradictory statements put out by government members on this, which has not been helpful whatsoever. You also said that you didn't see this as a big deal, that you've seen it as a good news story, and that there was no mention of money. In relation to those statements, can I ask, was the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform ever contacted regarding the level of pay that Katherine Zappone would be receiving? And if so, when did that take place? Do you now accept, understand and relate to the level of hurt and insult caused to many, many people who are carers in this state who are in receipt of a state pension in the state, with the flippant and throwaway remarks that were made in relation to a nominal salary of €15,000 a year. That's more than our state pensioners get. That's more than what our carers get. And can I ask also, and I'd like to just back up a little bit, Minister, if we could, can you outline the process where Article 19, this right of freedom of opinion and expression, the right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, why that was chosen? Why that Charter of Human Rights was chosen, as opposed to, say, Article 26.2, which focuses on the right to education, or Article 4, which prohibits slavery and servitude, a growing concern globally around human trafficking. What was the background to that? And on that same note, do you now accept that this position as Special Envoy has been tainted? That our standing, because of this debacle as a state, has been tainted? You are correct when it is said that these positions are well regarded internationally, and we have been provided with a list of countries who have special envoys who do similar work. However, the question must be asked, how many of those special envoys are previous ministers? I imagine the answer is very few. Okay. And finally, Chair, with your discretion, can I ask, Minister, you did say you weren't in the country for when the Marion event took place, and I accept that. However, you are a minister and you do attend Cabinet, and this event took place because of a decision that you made. What do you say to the partners and husbands around this country who have sat outside maternity hospitals while their partners inside have been told that their babies no longer have heartbeats? Because this shindig took place of a decision that you made. Do you accept the anger of businesses and recreational venues who have been closed for an inordinate amount of time? Do you accept the anger of families who have grieved and mourned and watched alone and watched family funerals online over the course of this pandemic? Because if you had not made that decision, that event would not have taken place.
Thank you. Minister, to respond.
Thanks for all those questions. Maybe I'll answer them in reverse. And of course, I can understand the anger of people who've made extraordinary sacrifices in the context of the restrictions that they've had to abide by in the context of COVID, and certainly the perceptions that many people have in relation to the event in the Marion Hotel did generate a lot of anger, and we heard that being expressed at the time. Has the appointment been tainted? Absolutely. You know, the concerns that people have expressed, that's why Katherine decided not to take the job. She said that she wouldn't accept it because of the publicity around it. Clearly, the process and her appointment did not have public confidence. And so it didn't go ahead, you know, and that's the unfortunate consequence of what happened and of some of the mistakes that were made on our side. In terms of how we take it forward now, and Senator Riley also asked this question. I mean, one of the things I would be happy to do is to, well, first of all, I think we have an obligation now to review the Special Envoy process in its entirety. Given the public commentary and the criticisms that have been made. One of the things that may be useful is to try and get agreement with this committee on a way of appointing special envoys in the future if we're going to use that diplomatic tool to advance Irish interests in different areas. I'd be very happy to do that. I mean, this shouldn't be in any way party political or government versus opposition or anything like that. The special envoys represent Ireland in a non-political way are in an area where we think we need added value. And special envoys are always, as far as I can remember, appointed on the basis of a government minister effectively headhunting somebody that they think would be very good and qualified and suitable for that job. Sometimes a special envoy role lasts for as little as 6 months. Sometimes it lasts for a couple of years. I mean, a good example, back in 2008, it was a different government at the time. Dermot Ahern appointed Nuala O'Loan. She was a former police ombudsman in Northern Ireland, very highly regarded, and she was appointed as a roving ambassador for conflict resolution and a special envoy to East Timor. You know, and that's the kind of role. You know, we appointed Tom Arnold to do a specific job in terms of his skill set and the context that we knew he had. That would add credibility to what Ireland was trying to say on food systems and nutrition internationally. You know, that's what makes special envoys and their appointment different to advertising for a job with the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's an appointment as opposed to an advertised position, but clearly the criticisms and the concerns that have been raised in relation to Katherine Zappone's appointment, I think now requires me to actually put a new process in place to try to get all party agreement on that. And I'm happy to try to do that through this committee in terms of how that will be done in the future. But if you turn a special envoy into a normal advertised job, if you like, in some ways it kind of defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do. When there's an opportunity where there's a short-term requirement to do a piece of work that often senior civil servants are asked to do, some of them serving and some of them former. And, you know, it's actually true that in terms of what many other countries have done, it's often the case that former ministers or former politicians, as well as former senior civil servants or scientists or experts, are asked to do special envoy jobs. And I can give you lots of examples of that. The US, Canada, the UK, Germany, in terms of those special envoy roles. So I just, you know, to the chair, in response to what Senator Riley said, and also what's just been asked of me, I am very happy to come back with a proposal around how we manage special envoys in the future, learning some lessons from what's happened here, and looking to try to get all party agreement on how we do that in a way that's transparent and has public confidence in the future. I am more than happy to do that, given the experience of the last number of weeks. In terms of why the last days of government, well, you know, I spoke to my Secretary General, and it was me who said, look, we're bringing a whole series of appointments to government. It's the last government meeting before the government breaks up for the month of August. There are things happening in September that we'd like to have this envoy in position for, which I can talk to you about in a second. And so it made sense to add this this appointment to the appointment of multiple ambassadors, I thought. In terms of the salary, I mean, I have never described the in and around sort of 13,000 to 15,000 euros in the way that you've described as a nominal salary or anything. I simply let that salary issue be negotiated by the department with Katherine Zappone, and I wasn't involved in it. The only point that I made earlier on it was that I never spoke to Katherine Zappone about money in relation to this role. I didn't think that was appropriate. Does the Department of Public Expenditure need to approve? Yes, they do. They need to approve any expenditure, and I understand that there was some correspondence in relation to that, and I presume that under the FOI process that will come out. In terms of Deputy Arda, did I feel that this was a reward? No, not at all. But I had seen that Katherine Zappone had done a good job with us and for us in terms of her role as a special envoy for the Security Council campaign. I also know that Katherine Zappone has campaigned all her life on issues around LGBTQ issues and freedom of expression and so on. And for that reason, just like other special envoys are effectively asked to consider a role because people think they can add value, that was the context in which I asked Katherine Zappone whether she'd do this. It was no more complicated than that. What's made it controversial, of course, is that she was a former politician and government minister. You know, I mean, I think I would ask the question, you know, if I'd asked Nuala Olone or Tom Arnold or a senior civil servant or a former Sec-Gen of the department, if I'd asked them to take up this role, I suspect there would have been little or no comment about it. You know, I think that's the truth of the situation. In relation to sharing of documents with the committee, yeah, look, we'll try and share as many documents with the committee as we can, of course. I mean, if we're going to be releasing them under FOI, there's no reason why we can't share them with the committee as well.
Thank you.
In terms of Senator Crockwell's questions, 13 special envoys for the UN Security Council. I can't remember, was it 13? But there was quite a number. We were sending them to different parts of the world, effectively canvassing for support for Ireland, which turned out to be very successful. The truth is that none of them were as qualified, in my view, as Katherine Zappone was for this particular role. And because Katherine had worked effectively with the department, that's why I asked whether she could add value after that work. And it was no more complicated than that. Should I have asked a serving civil servant? Well, you know, I could have, but I think Katherine was better qualified for this particular job. I have no idea whether we gave Katherine Zappone a diplomatic passport. I think if she had got the role as a special envoy, she probably would have been entitled to a diplomatic passport, but she certainly wouldn't have in the absence of actually representing the government, which she wasn't doing after she resigned as minister. And certainly there was no question of her travelling home to Ireland and claiming expenses from the department. I mean, the role hadn't even been put in place at that stage. I asked my Secretary General to speak to Katherine Zappone in terms of trying to finalise the arrangements. And I think we shared the job spec with the committee in terms of tasking to support the government's objectives and with a particular focus on UN framework, including the UN General Assembly, Third Committee, which is October, December of this year, Freedom Online Coalition, which is December of this year, Commission on the Status of Women, which is March of next year, and the Human Rights Council, which is June to July of next year, to support the implementation of the LGBTI+ at international level, which is Action 25 of the National LGBTI+ Inclusion Strategy, which is led by the Department of Foreign Affairs. 3, to support Ireland's international advocacy initiatives around key annual events, World Press Freedom Day, International Women's Day, Pride Month, and so on. Support the in-country advocacy work of Ireland's missions network through country visits. And we were going to give her a specific list of countries that we thought we could benefit most from in terms of those visits. And then we agreed a time frame with her and next steps in terms of how we would launch the her position and so on. So, you know, there's, I think, quite a lot of transparency around that, and I'm happy to share any other documentation that that should be available to the committee. Deputy Gannon, I think you asked something about is there a template for special envoy roles? Not really, I think is the answer to that question, because depending on the type of role that you're asking of a special envoy, I think the process is sometimes different. Sometimes it's a special envoy for the Department of Foreign Affairs that doesn't go to government. In this case, I thought it would be useful to actually go to government and get a special envoy for endorsed by the government rather than just by me and the Department of Foreign Affairs. But there are many examples of special envoys, and I can send you details on each of them if that would be helpful, Deputy, in terms of the process that was followed. Sorry, just trying to find any other questions that you'd asked. Oh yeah, just how long in advance of the Cabinet did the Taoiseach know? Well, in terms of detail, the Taoiseach, I informed him and the other Fine Gael ministers, you know, an hour before the Cabinet meeting at a Fine Gael. We were just going through the agenda, and I raised it as something that I was bringing to Cabinet. I had assumed that the same was happening with the Green Party and with Fianna Fáil. That wasn't the case because of issues that I raised earlier. I did mention it to the Taoiseach a few days earlier. He had texted me to say that he would be seeing Katherine Zappone, who was coming to Dublin. I had made no connection that was the Marion event, and I had said to him at that stage, we haven't finalised anything yet, but that we were working on whether Katherine Zappone could play a role as a special envoy. But that was I didn't give him any detail on that really until we were in advance of the cabinet meeting. So that's, I think the question's answered, but people can go back if I've missed something.
Minister, just there's 2 questions of mine that you didn't answer, just in relation to when you got the text and
sorry, yeah.
sent the text, and if any of your staffers went to the Marion event.
Yeah, sorry. Nobody, none of my staff went to the Marion. I mean, I can honestly say to you, I didn't even know the Marion event was going on. I knew that Katherine Zappone was in Dublin because I asked my SecGen to talk to her about the terms and conditions, because we wanted to try to finalise that before I brought the recommendation to Cabinet. And I knew that she was in Dublin. I was actually in Africa. I was in Kenya and Somalia, I think, at the time of the Marion event, so I wasn't thinking about it. Okay. Katherine Zappone texted me but it was a sort of a banner, sort of freeze frame of the event, if you like. There was no sort of formal request coming to me in terms of attending, but to be honest, I kind of ignored it. I didn't focus on it, and the event happened and obviously became highly controversial afterwards. Could
I ask you, Minister, did you see, just on that point, could I ask you, did you see any connection between the function in the Marion Hotel to which you were invited by text and the appointment?
No, I didn't. Sure, like, I mean, the appointment process was well underway long before that event. The paperwork within the department that had come back in terms of detailing the appointment and why it would add value and so on was well in advance of that. I mean, when that event took place, Katherine Zappone was in Dublin, and I asked my Secretary General to talk to her about finalising the appointment.
Had she any reason? Had she?
So it was that event.
Any reason to suspect that the matter might have been on a cabinet agenda?
Sorry?
Had she any reason to suspect that the matter might have been the subject of a cabinet agenda item 10 days later?
Well, I mean, that's a matter for Katherine to answer. You know, okay. I mean, my understanding was that she was in Dublin. She organised an event to recognise, work that she had been doing previously as a minister. But I wasn't involved in that.
Okay.
I didn't know who was going. It just wasn't a factor in the considerations that we were making. That event.
Okay, I'm conscious of the fact that we have a number of members who haven't come in, and
there's a question I asked earlier that just has come up again. The dates weren't specifically answered, but you mentioned you didn't tell the Taoiseach in any great detail until such time as immediately before the cabinet meeting. But you did say you mentioned it to him a few days earlier because the Taoiseach had mentioned he was attending an event. Organised.
No, sorry. It's important for me to be accurate. I got a text from the Taoiseach. I was away at the time, to say that he would be meeting Katherine Zappone in Dublin. She was in Dublin, and was I had I been speaking to Katherine Zappone in relation to was there anything that he needed to know, basically? And I texted him back to say we are looking at a concept of a special envoy role for Katherine in the LGBT and the freedom of expression space. That was the only conversation.
But if he knew nothing about it, why would he ask, is there anything I should know when attending this in relation to any conversation I might have?
Sorry, he didn't mention anything about attending anything, Barry, because I would have remembered that, and it would have triggered something. He said that he was going to see. No, I'm
sorry, but did you not just say that the Taoiseach's contacted you to say he was attending an event, and Katherine Zappone? No,
I said the Taoiseach texted me to say that he was going to meet Katherine Zappone when she was in Dublin.
Oh yeah, going to meet.
He didn't say anything about going to an event or where it was at or anything like that.
Yeah. But he was going to meet with her.
I mean, if he had, I'd say it to you because it wouldn't make any difference.
No problem.
Was, but
that's no problem.
That is
Chair,
he did say he was going to meet with her, He did say he was going to meet with her.
He did, yeah.
And he wanted to know from you if there was anything you
needed to know
that he could relate to her. Why would that be the case? Sure, I mean, if he was going to meet her in a personal capacity or professional capacity, or
I mean, I don't know is the answer to that question.
I
get texts back and forth with the Taoiseach,
So do I.
as you'd expect, all the time. He was meeting Katherine Zappone, and he simply was looking for an update from me as to whether there was anything he should know. And I texted him back to say that we had been working on a concept of a special envoy role, and that was it. I mean, you asked me
what relevance had that you were going to offer it to her. Is that what you were saying to him?
No, because that process
you had
was
offered
happening.
it to her.
Okay.
No, I mean, please don't read things
I'm
into
not trying to ascertain.
Yeah, and I'm just giving you the
Because
facts.
those others in the cabinet weren't aware of this at all. Never became aware.
Yeah, and the Taoiseach had no hand, act, or part in the process of appointment of Katherine Zappone. That was my decision on the back of the work that my department had done on it. He had absolutely no hand, act, or part in it. He simply was inquiring, and he had no hand, act, or part in it right into the cabinet meeting, because the Taoiseach didn't even know about it. If the Taoiseach had been involved at any point in this, he would have.
You just said you just told him in the days previously.
Yeah, I told him.
We're considering her for a position.
Yeah, which was my the work that we were doing. The Taoiseach had nothing to do with it.
Had you relayed that to Katherine Zappone at that time, or did he relay it to her?
Oh, I didn't relay anything to Katherine Zappone, because I didn't speak to her when she was in Dublin.
But you did tell the Taoiseach you were considering her.
No, I told the Taoiseach, not the Taoiseach.
Yes.
I told the Taoiseach when he asked me the question, is there anything I should know, because I'm meeting Katherine Zappone next weekend. I said that we're working on a special envoy role that I think she would be suitable for. I can't remember the exact text I said, but that.
And do you know if he relayed that to her at the subsequent when he met with her?
I have no idea.
No. Okay. Thanks, Minister.
I mean, Katherine herself would have known a lot more detail about this than the Taoiseach would have known, because Katherine Zappone would have been
offered it to her at that stage.
It's bizarre that the Taoiseach went solely for a few minutes just to relay that information to Katherine Zappone. Chair, can I just ask, while we're on this issue, can I just ask a very,
I'll ask Deputy Brady
question?
to desist for a moment. I'll let you in before the end of the meeting, but I'm very conscious of the fact that we've Deputy Lawless and Deputy Stanton who haven't had an opportunity of asking questions. I'm going to call Deputy Lawless first. I'm going to call Senator Wilson, and I'm going to call Deputy Stanton, who have been waiting, and then we may have an opportunity for supplementary, as I indicated earlier. But I would ask that the questions be direct and concise if we're going to make progress. So Deputy Lawless, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, the problem coming into this stage is much of the ground has been trod, but I'll try to be succinct and get to the point and not cover all ground. Minister, you talked about this a few times, but I'm still not 100% clear. You briefed the Taoiseach, I think you said you briefed the Taoiseach in some detail, and you also said that you mentioned it to the Taoiseach a few weeks beforehand. But despite briefing the Taoiseach in some detail and indeed mentioning to him, you didn't brief or mention to the Taoiseach. And I appreciate that you apologise for that. I take that at face value and in good faith. But I think it's yourself, it's far from ideal in a cabinet government with collective responsibility, etc. So you might just come back to that. I'm still a bit lost as to that. Why was the Taoiseach briefed as opposed to the Taoiseach? Is it because it was party? This is a coalition government, so it's a cabinet collective responsibility. I'm just a bit confused as to that, and I would be quite concerned if that was to rise again or a similar situation. The next point I want to ask is this position now defunct? Has it been abandoned? Is the position gone? Or will somebody else be sought out for this role? Was it purely a one-off, unique to the person, or is there actually still a vacancy? And if there is still a vacancy, is there a job description, and what is the process to fill that? And if it's not to be filled, why was it important if Katherine Zappone did it, but it's not important if someone else does it? I suppose leading on from that, in terms of the job description, there are many areas that I think we could benefit from a special envoy for freedom of expression. We see academic freedom under attack in Hungary. We see judicial freedom under attack in Poland, just to mention two within the EU. We're all aware, unfortunately, of Belarus. We see Russian and Chinese influence coming into the Middle East, coming into Eastern Europe, coming into various different jurisdictions. And we see really, I suppose, attacks on freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, which include judicial opinion, academic opinion, and press freedom, in many, many countries. And I've just given a list of 4 or 5 there. I'm not sure if those countries were on the list for our Special Envoy Zappone to visit or to tackle. And perhaps you could actually confirm if they were or they weren't, because they seem to be where these issues are at a peak. Or was it to be sort of a softer role, maybe to apply it on the fringes of the UN, etc., where perhaps maybe useful, but perhaps less useful.
Okay.
My last question, I think, then is particular to the process by which Ireland secured a seat on the Security Council. And you mentioned, I think, that there was a number, I think you said 25 special envoys were appointed at that time. But from my understanding of the statement and from reading back and listening today, Katherine Zappone was the only serving politician to be appointed as an envoy at that time. Other people may have been appointed as envoys, but they were diplomats or they were in other roles. Why was Katherine Zappone over and above any other minister or any other politician, or indeed any other senator for that matter, given this title of envoy? Did she have spare capacity? Was she seen as particularly suited? Was her department not particularly demanding on her time? Was there a reason? Could she not have done that job as a minister? And I suppose just, I don't suggest that I was operating at the same level or anything like it, but I mean, I attended an IPU forum event a few months before that vote. I'm sure all of the members of the Oireachtas that had the opportunity to travel did. And we made the case to colleagues from elsewhere as we went about our business. And that was part and parcel of being a member of the Oireachtas and serving our country, I would have thought, without needing any title to do it. So I'm just a little bit confused as to why only one member of the Oireachtas, to my knowledge, was appointed as an envoy amongst those 25. Okay. Why did she need that title at the time? And what was the point of it all? What was the purpose of that at that particular time? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deputy Lawless. I'm calling Senator Wilson, but in calling Senator Wilson, I might add that Senator Wilson was the first one to contact me seeking this meeting when the controversy erupted towards the end of July. Senator Dermot Wilson, please. Senator Wilson, you're frozen. You may well be muted, Senator Wilson.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I very much welcome the Minister and his officials here this evening to discuss this very important issue. And I want to, first of all, say very briefly, I agree with my colleague Senator Joe O'Reilly that I also hold Katherine Zappone in very high regard, and this is absolutely nothing to do with her. It's to do with the process that involved her appointment as a special envoy. Minister, I have quite a few points to raise, but I'll be very brief, so I've cut them down. You did mention in your address that, or in your answer to some of the questions, that the memo was on the agenda for the Cabinet meeting. So in relation to that, could I ask you, when and on what date and time was the memo entered on the e-Cabinet system? How long in advance of the Cabinet meeting was this, if it happened? Was the memo circulated to other government departments for observations? And I think you might have alluded to that already. You said in the media and here again today that the memo was not raised by your special advisor at the meeting of ministerial advisors held on the day before the Cabinet meeting. Why was it not raised? My understanding is that at these pre-Cabinet meetings of advisors, each advisor is asked to brief other ministerial advisors on memos their ministers will be bringing to Cabinet. Was the special advisor aware of this memo, and had they seen it in advance of this meeting? Why would they neglect, if they were aware of this, to inform their colleagues of a memo emanating from their department? And was the memo on the Cabinet agenda at that point? And if it was, how was it skipped over? Was the contents of the memo discussed with the Secretary-General of the Department of the Taoiseach and the Cabinet Secretary in advance of the Cabinet meeting? In relation to the freedom of information requests that have been submitted by various journalists and others, already alluded to by Deputy Brady and my colleague Senator Arda, I understand that a little over a week ago your department decided to issue a blank refusal to a freedom of information request from a very highly regarded journalist. That request asked, and I quote, copies of any records held referring or relating to the appointment of Katherine Zappone as a special envoy to the United Nations on freedom of expression, and copies of any letters, representations received by the department relating to the above, unquote. This refusal, I understand, was based on administrative grounds under Section 15(1)(f) of the Freedom of Information Act, as the department plans to publish the records, as the Secretary-General has outlined, but with redactions by September the 8th. My question is, have these records been published? And if not, why are we not in possession of them here today if we are to have all of the facts and come to some sort of a decision in relation to the process? Very briefly, in a follow-up to queries from my colleague Deputy Cowan, you said the Taoiseach was not involved in any detailed discussions in advance of the Cabinet proposals. Could you clarify what was he told and when, and what date was Ms Zappone offered the job, subject to agreeing terms and conditions? And finally, what date were terms and conditions agreed with the Secretary-General of your department? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Stanton, please.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you. I won't repeat any of the questions that were asked already. Only I just want to declare one thing at the beginning. When I was chair of the Justice Committee a number of years ago, I served with the then Senator Zappone, and I found her to be an independent thinker. I found her to be courageous. I found her to be brave, very talented, very diplomatic, highly respected, and hard-working and selfless. And I want to put that on the record, because too many times we have had hearings and debates and media reports about colleagues and former colleagues, and we afterwards, it was found that they were totally exonerated. Like former Minister Shatter, one of the most amazing ministers I ever came across, extraordinarily hardworking and talented, and he was virtually hounded out of office, as was Frances Fitzgerald when she was there, and again both of them were totally exonerated later on. So I want to say that in my experience of working with Katherine Zappone, she was exemplary, very caring, very hardworking and selfless, and I think it's a missed opportunity that she has now decided, because of the controversy, to walk away from this position. And I've just one question for the Minister. I note there that a number of reports cite that democracy in the world is in decline. My colleague there, James Lawless, has already mentioned a number of countries where this is evident, and there are far more. And in the last we've seen 15 consecutive years of decline in global freedom. We have seen 38% of the world's population are now living under regimes which are not free. And most recently, of course, we've seen reports of what's happening or what could happen and what might be happening in Afghanistan, which we'll come into later. And that's one country which is getting the spotlight at the moment. But there's so much more happening in many more jurisdictions. And democracy, even in Europe, is in retreat in parts of Europe, as again Deputy Lawless has said earlier on. In March this year, Freedom House said that the share of the countries not designated not free has reached its highest level since the deterioration of democracy began in 2006, and that countries with declines in political rights and civil liberties outnumber those with gains by the largest margin recorded during the 15-year period. So we're living in a time where we need people out there advocating for freedom of expression and opinion, now more than ever, if we value democracy as we practice it. Now, there are some countries which say that our form of democracy is wrong and that what they're doing is correct. Obviously, I don't agree with that. I'm sure most colleagues here don't either. We see across the world media being attacked, independent media being attacked, reporters being executed and jailed. We see opposition groups being banned, leaders of opposition groups being jailed, and so on. So could I ask the Minister to comment on that? And did these reports have anything to influence his thinking in appointing somebody to be our advocate for expression and freedom, and of freedom of expression and opinion globally? And I would ask colleagues to join with me in saying that now more than ever, when democracy is under such threat internationally, we need to be vigilant. And it's happening internally in countries where we have alt-right and alt-left groups coming forward, and it's happening across Europe, and it's happening across, we saw it happen in the United States earlier this year as well. So I think we've got to be vigilant and look at the bigger picture here. And I just want to say again that where former Minister Zappone was concerned, that I hold her in the highest of regard. She's a woman of exceptional ability and courage, as she has shown by what she has done throughout her life. I think she was an inspired choice for this particular position, and especially when she was living in New York. I think we've got to raise our gaze a little bit here and see look at the bigger picture. I think that's hugely important. So I think that's all I have to say on this, Chairman, and I just feel that it's a missed opportunity. I feel that if mistakes were made, I think there were mistakes, not intentional. I thank the Minister for being here this evening with us and his officials. But I think we've got to be more vigilant, and perhaps, Chairman, later on, this committee should have a look at what's happening with respect to democracy, freedom of the press, freedom of expression and opinion across the world, and see what we can do to strengthen freedom for peoples who won't experience freedom. In fact, when we look at it, we are very high in the Human Freedom Index in Ireland. We're very much up there. Where the World Press Freedom Index is also concerned, we're very, very high. So I think we're very fortunate here in this country, but we shouldn't take that for granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Stanton. I think it's timely, having regard to what Deputy Stanton has said, that I should now intervene on the basis that our meeting must come to a conclusion in about 25 minutes' time. We have a number of direct and serious questions have been put to Minister Coveney for response. I'm very keen that he have an opportunity to respond. I'm conscious of the fact that I still see the hands of Deputy Brady, of Deputy Gannon, of Senator Arda, Deputy Cowan. We haven't had a round of supplementaries. What I'm asking members now, in particular Deputy Brady, Deputy Cowan and others, and Deputy Gannon, whose hand I see, and also Senator Crockwell, whose hand has appeared. Is it the view of the meeting that we should defer a consideration of Afghanistan until the earliest opportunity when the Minister will be available, having regard to the fact that that might be some days away given the Minister's diary and the fact that he has international commitments? Or should we now cease discussion and proceed at what will be a very limited discussion on the situation in Afghanistan in any event? So, where do we stand? Deputy Brady,
Chair.
Should we proceed on this issue? Deputy Gannon?
Chair, I don't think we have enough time to give that issue as much the due process that it deserves,
Okay.
so maybe defer it.
Chairman.
Okay, that appears to be the consensus of the meeting, that we'll continue, allow the Minister to respond and then deal with a number of outstanding issues, and that we will defer the matter of Afghanistan until the earliest possible opportunity, which at the earliest will be the end of next week, probably the week after. Okay, Great. Minister Coveney to deal with it. Is that agreed?
Yeah. Well, I'm in your hands, Chair.
Is that agreed?
Whatever
Yeah. Okay.
prefer, I'm happy to
I think
I
think I've reached agreement on that. Deputy Gannon, Deputy Brady, Deputy Cowan, Senator Arda, and Senator Crockwell, who I can't see, but who I think has indicated a further question. So, if I could ask you, Minister, having regard to the time on this section of the meeting, that we just had 25 minutes, ask you to deal with the response to Deputy Lawless and others, and then I'm anxious to come back for a supplementary round with Deputy Cowan, Deputy Brady. Thanks, Minister.
Okay. Yeah. No. So just first of all, the comments from Deputy Stanton really sum up why we felt this role was useful and would add value to the work of the department. And it was my judgment that Katherine Zappone was someone who'd be very suitable for this role. And that's the way special envoys are appointed. You know, there's a role that the department or the minister thinks needs a new focus or added value, and then you pick somebody who you think can do a good job, and that's what we did in the context of this. Initially, as I've said, I think in the media, and I think as the Secretary General has said, initially we looked at an LGBTIQ plus special envoy because Ireland is and continues to do a lot of work in that area. But the recommendation, or the view of the department, I should say, was that broadening it out would allow that person to be more effective in terms of getting access to countries and raising questions in a broader human rights context. And that's why the the role developed into what it was. Could I just say also, because I think there was a suggestion earlier that perhaps the Taoiseach had some involvement in the build-up to meeting Katherine Zappone in Dublin in terms of actually getting an appointment across the line or something. I mean, at that point, I would have spoken to Katherine Zappone long in advance of that to ask her whether she would be interested in taking up this role. And the department was working on what the job spec might look like and so on. And I was asking SecGen to try to finalise that at this stage. So, I mean, this would have been going on for weeks in advance of that. So, I mean, the Marion event, which I think was on the 21st, had no involvement whatsoever in this process. In fact, I didn't even know that event was of any significance, I have to say. And we were trying to finalise this process, ironically, while I was actually out of the country in advance of bringing something to Cabinet. In terms of Senator Wilson's questions, was there a memo on the agenda for Cabinet? Yes, there was. But what often happens when you're making an actual appointment is that there's a memo that goes to government the previous week. Normally, there's a deadline on the Friday before a Tuesday's Cabinet meeting. But if there are names to be appointed, then those names are provided in the couple of days before the Cabinet actually takes place. Otherwise, names can be leaked and so on. So that's why in the advisors' meetings and so on, in the build-up to a Cabinet meeting, they go through all of these appointments, and if there's something controversial, they'll raise it and try and solve problems and so on. And you know, it was at that point that I should have ensured that the Taoiseach or his advisors were aware of this, and indeed the Green Party for that matter. And that didn't happen, and that was a genuine mistake that obviously we'll try to ensure isn't repeated. In terms of FOI, my understanding is that what we want to do is publish all of the papers in relation to this affair at the same time, and obviously they can then be shared with the Oireachtas as well. Was the contents of the memo discussed between SecGens? No, I don't think so. And certainly, if the Secretary General of the Taoiseach's department knew about this, I'm sure he would have raised it with the Taoiseach. So this was in my department, and should have been communicated earlier, and that, as I say, was my fault. Is the position now defunct? I hope not, but I mean, I'd like to come back to the committee and get agreement on how we approach special envoys in the future. I mean, that's what I said earlier. I mean, I do not want this issue to be something that every time I make a suggestion that we should have a special envoy in a certain area, which is something that virtually every country in the Western world is doing, by the way, that somehow I'm appointing somebody in a way that's inappropriate. Like, that's, I mean, I don't want that for future ministers, and I don't want that in terms of my own role either.
That's noted, Minister. Thank you.
I'd like to come back to the committee in terms of trying to get an agreed process here that recognises the special envoy selection process. Just to be clear, with Deputy Lawless, there was, I think, 12 special envoys were deployed to advance Ireland's regional and bilateral engagement in the build-up to trying to get support before the vote on the Security Council. 9 months in advance of that vote, the government asked Katherine Zappone, who was a serving minister at the time, whether she would be a special envoy in this area. She had been interested in it. She had been effectively campaigning on the issue when she was abroad, and she took a real interest in it. And so I thought she would be a good additional support. And having a government minister looking to get support, you know, adds an awful lot of value. And, you know, I could only do so much. I wasn't travelling actually that much, as it happens, mainly because I was involved in a lot of Brexit issues. And so having a second minister that was willing to put time into campaigning for the Security Council was very helpful. And she was very helpful, I have to say, and genuinely interested in the issues. And it was no more complicated than that. She wasn't paid anything extra
okay,
and that would have happened through the departments as would normally be the case.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'm still conscious of the clock, and I'm now proceeding to the round of supplementaries, and I will ask members to be concise and not be repetitive, and not go over ground that we have already received answers on. And I'm going to members in the following order. Senator Ardagh, Deputy Gannon, Deputy Brady, Deputy Cowan, Senator Crockwell, and I see Deputy Clark as well. Senator Ardagh, please.
Very quickly,
Quick
Minister,
question.
and thank you, Cahill. And I know I'm being very pedantic in relation to this, but you didn't clarify exactly when you got the text message. You say you were in Africa when the event was going on, but you didn't say when you got the text message. And the reason I'm asking, and the reason I'm being so pedantic is that we're looking for a complete timeline, and we may not get access. I know you agreed to share the correspondence with the committee, but we don't know, and I don't know if it's appropriate for us to have access to your text messages between former Minister Zappone and yourself. So that is why I'm looking for a little more detail in relation to the text communication.
Okay, the time of the text insofar as we can. Deputy Gannon, please. Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. Deputy Gannon, briefly.
Thank you.
You're okay?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just wanted, I suppose, to add to Deputy Staunton's contribution that across the world, democratic values are on the thread. I think one of the factors that contributes to that is the public perception that insiders are often given jobs without fair process or open process. And I suppose that's why this is particularly important. And in that regard, Minister, I just want to ask again, you mentioned that Katherine Zappone contacted you in February and outlined our work with the UNFPA. And very specifically, you said you didn't feel you were being lobbied at that point. You also referenced a conversation you had with Katherine Zappone late last summer, where she made herself available for either professional or personal work with your office to the UN. At that point, did you feel you were being lobbied by Katherine Zappone for a job or a role as an envoy or any other position?
Okay, the issue of lobbying and conversations. Deputy Brady, please, and then I'm going back to the Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, the spokesperson for you had said that the first you heard about the Zappone gig in the Marion Hotel was a report that you read in a national newspaper. That is now incorrect. That was, you have stated you received a text from Ms. Zappone yourself. And just to follow on with the question in terms of the specific date of that text that you got, which I would deem as an invitation to that gig. So can we have a specific date for that? Also a specific date for the text message that you got from the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. Did that text from the Taoiseach come before or after the invitation? And also just in terms of, you said that was the first time that you had any kind of engagement with the Taoiseach in relation to the appointment of Katherine Zappone. Am I right on that? Or was there previous occasions in which you had communication with the Taoiseach in relation to a proposal or an offer of that role to Katherine Zappone? And finally, in relation to the FOIs, a request for an FOI has already been turned down. I want to know on what grounds, and whether the FOIs will cover all of the text messages, because I think it is critically important. Other jurisdictions deem that text messages, private text messages, should be FOIable. I think the same should be in this instance here. So can we get a commitment from you, Minister, that text messages between yourself and Ms. Zappone, and text messages between yourself and the Taoiseach in relation to this specific issue will also be made available under FOI and also to all members of this committee? Thanks, sir.
Well, there is a legal procedure for FOIs and there is an accepted practice and procedure for FOIs, and I would remind members of the comments of Secretary-General Burgess earlier in the meeting. Minister, on the matter of the direct questions as put, and then we'll be back. It's Deputy Cowan and Senator Crockwell and Deputy Clark for a final wrap-up. Thanks, Minister. I think we're probably gone off air for the moment, Minister, if you could.
Sorry, Senator, thanks.
Yes, thank you.
In relation to Senator Arda's question, to be honest, I don't have the exact date of when I got that text, but I remember seeing it after the event because of the furore around it. But I have to say, I didn't really take any notice of it when I got it at the time, and I didn't answer it, and I didn't go because I wasn't there. So I just don't have that date, I'm afraid. Deputy Gannon, democratic values under threat, partly because of insiders get jobs without process. I mean, I think there was process here. The department went through quite an extensive process of looking at whether there was an added value to the role that subsequently was offered to Katherine Zappone. And, you know, if you look at the roles that people like Nuala Alone would have played, Tom Arnold, Kenneth Thompson, you know, these are all people who are in and around government, who are connected, who are proven good communicators, and that's why they're asked to do these jobs. There are, and I mean, I don't think that should be seen as insiders, but I take the point that you're making, which is why if we can look at a new process that you feel is more likely to gain public trust, if you like, in terms of roles like this, then I'm more than open to it. But
thank you, Minister.
In terms of the question around lobbying, because you've asked me that question twice, I'm sorry, I should have answered it the first time. I didn't regard Katherine Zappone as lobbying me. I had a conversation with her after she left office, when she was essentially ringing to say goodbye. She was heading off to New York, or else she was there. I think she spoke to me actually before she left for New York, and she basically said as part of that conversation, you know, good luck with the UN Security Council job. If I could be of any help in a private capacity or professional capacity, you know, I'd be delighted to be. I mean, that was like, it wasn't a phone call to make herself available for that. It was I suspect she rang around a number of her colleagues to say that she was, you know, effectively starting a new life in New York. The subsequent conversation I had with her around the US presidential election was because she was following it closely, and she suspected I would be too. And then she updated me in terms of the fact that she was working with UNFPA. So, you know, I just don't think it's fair to turn that into, every time she contacted me, the assumption is that she was lobbying me for a job. I mean, that isn't how I saw it, I have to say. I was the one who then asked for my SecGen's view on whether Katherine Zappone could add value to our team, given the fact that she'd worked with us quite a lot in the build-up to the Security Council, and that she was now living in New York. That was essentially what happened. In terms of Deputy Brady, from recollection, I mean, like a lot of people, I suspect, on this call, I don't hold on to text messages for long periods of time in terms of data on my phone and so on. But from recollection, in an effort to try to be as open as I can be with the committee, I got a text from the Taoiseach. I think it was the week before, because he said that in the next few days, Katherine Zappone's in Dublin and I'm meeting her. Is there anything I should know? Basically, I don't remember the exact text, but that's effectively. And I got back to him to say, look, I'd been talking to her about a special envoy position that the department was working on, and I effectively, that was it. I mean, he was essentially wanted an update whether there was anything he should know, I think, and it was no more or less than that. And on FOI, look, I mean, I'll make available anything that's appropriate to be made available under FOI. You know, there's no issue there.
Thank you.
There isn't anything to hide.
So is the Minister saying he's deleted all of the texts in relation to it? And can he confirm which text came first, from the Taoiseach or from Katherine Zappone? I find it unreal that the Minister would delete text like this, if that is the case.
Well, I don't think the Minister has that information at his disposal. as we speak. Deputy Cowan, please.
Sorry, Chair. Which text came first, from the Taoiseach or the invite to the party?
Minister, have you that information? You may not have.
I don't know, but I don't really see the relevance either way. But
okay.
I'm not sure which came first, to be honest.
Yeah.
I was not aware of the event. I largely ignored. I mean, as a lot of people do, they get texts with branded images or photographs or whatever. I wasn't even in the country, so I wasn't focused on that event one way or the other. And I, as it happens, didn't make the connection between that event and the text I got from the Taoiseach. But I'm just being open with the committee. That's what happened.
Okay, that's acceptable. Deputy Cowan,
Sorry, Chair. I had asked the previous question in terms of engagement with the Taoiseach in relation to the process. Had there been any conversations prior to that text message with the Taoiseach around Katherine Zappone and the process or appointment or the proposal?
No, there wasn't, Deputy.
No, thank you, Minister. Deputy Cowan, please.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I think, Minister, I'm glad this appointment didn't go ahead. I made that point earlier. Lessons have to be learned. New processes and procedures have to be put in place. Simply saying there was previous envoys employed without such a furore is not good enough when you're considered this appointment was for a former minister and a close colleague in the last government. And I know there are much more pressing items, such as Afghanistan, such as the COVID restriction restorations, such as the Housing for All document this week. And I don't want to play gotcha. Only became aware of the details associated with this appointment in the immediately before the cabinet meeting at which the proposal was made. I now believe you're saying that you got a contact from the Taoiseach by text saying that he would be meeting with Katherine Zappone in the coming days and that he needed to know, was there anything that he should be aware of? You informed him that you were considering her for a role as a special envoy. There's a lot of information in that alone, which would say he knew a lot more than getting the specific details on immediately before the meeting. So what date exactly was that in the context of when did the Director General, the Secretary General and Katherine Zappone agree terms, you having offered the post to her subject to those terms being agreed? So what date was that? What date was the Taoiseach informed? And what date was the cabinet meeting? So as we could see a timeline. And I do that with the best will in the world. As I said to you, the appointment didn't take place, thankfully. Lessons have been learned to move on. But, at the time at which this appointment was made, the inference was that the information mistakenly only came to bear immediately before the cabinet meeting. That's not exactly correct now, for whatever reasons. And just to clarify it, so as we can put the issue behind us, we can move on and deal with much more pressing and important matters from here on in.
Thanks, Deputy Cameron. Final couple of questions. Senator Crockwell and Deputy Circuit Clerk. Senator Crockwell, please, and then final comments from the Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Minister, perception is everything. If we were appointing a clerical officer in the morning, it would be an open and transparent competition. I fail to understand how you would appoint somebody to such an important global position without bringing that appointment to this committee first and having this committee discuss it and take some notice of it. I am really disturbed by some of the last minute appointments that were made at the last cabinet meeting of the last Dáil session. I find it very disturbing, and it clearly is being interpreted by members of the public as if you're in the club, you're going to get all the goodies that are going. If you're not in the club, you have no chance whatsoever in this country. And that's the way the Zappone appointment has come across. Notwithstanding the woman was an excellent choice under normal circumstances, it's also the way the appointment of some ambassadors that have to take up their positions in 10 months' time is being interpreted. If you're in the club, you're being looked after. If you're not, you're not being looked after. I would ask for a process to be put in place that this committee and other committees would have sight of these envoy appointments before they're made in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I don't know what other appointments Senator Crockwell is referring to. There were a number, as the Minister said, but we're dealing with the issue of special envoys, and I think it would be unfair on the process and unfair of everybody involved at the last minute, Senator Crockwell, to raise other issues that are unrelated to the appointment of special envoys. Final question, Senator Clark, and back to the Minister. Sorry, Deputy Clark. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I find it very difficult to believe that before coming into this committee meeting this evening, that you didn't have your ducks in a row, that you didn't know what text messages had come in, from whom and when. I also find it very difficult to believe that it's standard practice for people to delete text messages. I suggest, respectively, Minister, that you either invest in a new phone or invest in some cloud backup, because that is not standard messages, standard practice among anybody that I know. Now, I have asked for you to provide a timeline in the run-up to this appointment. And twice, 3 times, actually, you have referenced FOIs and you have referenced papers. Am I now to believe, Minister, that you will only provide a timeline of events for this appointment to this committee subject to FOI? Do we have to wait as a committee of this Oireachtas? Do we have to wait in line, like the journalists who wish to report on this event in the media, to get access to this information? And information relating to calls, texts, WhatsApp, emails, conversations, a full timeline, Minister. Are you telling this committee we have to abide by FOI rules?
No, I think it's important that we're fair to the Minister now. We have been discussing this issue for almost 2 hours. We have been provided with a lot of information. There are some outstanding issues to which reference was made, and we would ask that it be followed up in writing. But I believe we should be fair to the Minister as far as the process is concerned. So I'm going to ask the Minister to respond to a recent question.
So look, just on timelines, because I'm happy to answer that question. I mean, and I've given a number of timelines already in the context of the first conversation I had with my Secretary General on the 24th of February. There was then effectively a food for thought paper prepared in the context of the Department of Foreign Affairs responsibilities and the implementation of the National LGBTI+ inclusion strategy, but it was a food for thought paper following that conversation with the Sec Gen. That was on the 25th of March. And then there was an overview prepared of practice in other EU member states and in the UK and the US on the appointment of ambassadors and envoys with human rights responsibilities. That was on the 29th of March. There was an exchange between different divisions within the department and with our team in Geneva, which is where our expertise is on human rights. And there's a concept note prepared setting out the rationale and scope for the appointment of an envoy in the human rights space. And that was the 18th of April. So, I basically had a conversation at the end of February. There was a process then that was taking place within the department. I was getting on with other things. This was an issue that was effectively under consideration, and I was waiting for them to come back to me. There's nothing unusual about that. And then towards the end of this process then, in the build-up to a government decision on the 27th of July, I felt it would be useful to try to bring it to a conclusion for that government meeting, because it was the last government meeting effectively of the term. And we were appointing a whole series of ambassadors, so I thought it was a good time also to appoint this special envoy role. I asked the Sec Gen to discuss the proposed role with Katherine Zappone. I think that was on the 19th of July. The Sec Gen met with Katherine Zappone to discuss with her the role. So there was a process underway. It had nothing to do with any other ministers or anybody else. This was a process underway between the Department of Foreign Affairs and Katherine Zappone. What happened in the Merrion and all that is it's a completely separate issue. Which is why I didn't take any notice of the Merrion thing. It was nothing. I was out of the country. I had nothing, no involvement or interest in it, one way or the other. On the On the 22nd of July, there was a special envoy terms of reference paper done around the rationale, tasking, time frame and support, and I think that was shared with the committee, is my understanding. The mandate and the appointment was approved by me on the 24th of July, so that we could then put the government memo together before the government meeting on the 27th of July. So that's the time frame that people are asking for. And this was a process that was underway in parallel with all the other things that were going on at the same time. But you know, I think, you know, there are some inferences, I think, that somehow something you know, inappropriate was going on, and that wasn't the case, which is why I brought it to Cabinet for approval. What I should have done is had the conversation in advance of Cabinet to make sure that the other two parties in government knew about that. I raised it with my own colleagues effectively for the first time in any detail, including with the Taoiseach in any detail, in the meeting before the Cabinet, when I explained what the job was about and how it came about, and so on. I hadn't gone through it in any detail with anyone before that. So I mean, I hope that gives. I mean, this, and I mean, Senator Crockwell's comments. You know, if you're in the club, you got appointments. I mean, Senator Crockwell seems to be raising a concern in terms of how we appoint ambassadors. I mean, we appointed. We announced the appointment of a new ambassador to London, to Paris, to Washington, and to the UN, all pretty senior roles, and to Paris, very senior roles. It is absolute normal practice in the department that you would announce ambassadors in terms of transitions, particularly for big appointments, as all of those appointments are. In months in advance before they actually happen, because then people essentially change their lives. You know, they've got to bring their families with them in many cases. They're moving to a different part of the world for the first time, and that process takes time, and you need to give people notice. And there isn't anything unusual about that. And I really don't want the appointment of ambassadors to be somehow rolled into the appointment of a special envoy here, because they're entirely different processes. And as I say, the whole point of a special envoy role is there is a flexibility around it, where if you have a specific task that you want done and you have someone who has the skill set to do it, the minister can appoint a special envoy to get that job done. And that's what happened here. There wasn't there weren't, you know, other considerations involved.
All right, I'm obliged to bring matters to a conclusion in accordance with the current COVID restrictions, and hopefully for the last time. I want to thank the Minister on behalf of the committee. I want to thank Minister Coveney for meeting with us here and for dealing with members' questions in the manner as dealt. I want to thank officials for being present, Ms. Hyland and Mr. Burgess. I want to, on behalf of the committee, indeed on my own behalf, I want to wish Secretary General Burgess well. This is the last meeting of the Foreign Affairs Committee that he will be at in his capacity as Sec Gen. Dare I say, this is the last meeting he'll be at in his capacity as Sec Gen, because he steps down. I think this evening I want to thank him for his leadership and stewardship in the department as Secretary General over the past 7.5 years. He's stepping aside as Sec Gen. He will be continuing in the Department of Foreign Affairs as Ambassador to France, and we wish him well in that regard. I want to thank members for their contribution and for the process that we deployed. My two takeaways from the meeting are such that the Minister has acknowledged, indeed as he did shortly after the controversy, that some mistakes were made, and that the process is somewhat less than satisfactory. He acknowledged here this afternoon that he is considering a revised process and that revised process will involve reference to this committee. And we would agree that there should be a role for this committee in the context of such appointments. That's in regard to special envoys. I'm sure Senator Crockwell didn't mean to cast any adverse aspersions or otherwise on the appointment of ambassadors. I think it was regrettable that towards the end of the meeting that implication was made. I'm sure it wasn't meant, and I see Senator Crockwell indicating that he agrees with me on that point. And of course, the second takeaway, as well as the process, is the issue of the communication and the timelines, acknowledging what Secretary General Burgess said over an hour ago, that what the department wished to do is to provide information rather than in any way hinder or in any way restrict the provision of information. So there's some more work to do in that regard, either directly under FOI requests or equally as important, requests from members of this committee, through this committee, through our channels as the parliamentary committee on foreign affairs and defence. And there are some documents and records that we would be anxious to see. But I want to acknowledge the documents and papers already furnished in that regard, and thank officials for the briefing. So with that, I'm going to bring matters to a conclusion. And Minister, we trust that you will be in a position to join us for a meeting in respect of the situation in Kabul and Afghanistan at the earliest opportunity. As soon as your diary permits, we will be very anxious to accommodate you for such an engagement. And since our meeting started, I received an apology from Senator O'Donnell that I wish to record. So I'm now adjourning sine die. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members.